You know that feeling when you're scrolling through the internet and suddenly you're 12 years old again. That's what happens when you think about the early web. Back in the day, the web was like a wild party where everyone brought their own weird idea of how the internet should work. I remember the days when you'd type in a URL and hope it didn't take forever to load. And when it did, you'd just laugh and keep going. So, what's the one website or app from that era that's stuck in your head, like a pop song you can't get out of your head? We're going to talk about it. And maybe you'll remember it too. Or maybe you'll just laugh at the memory.
So what exactly are we talking about? Like, are we talking about the internet as it was, or just the websites people used to surf? Because back then, the internet was like a big, slow, and weirdly colorful version of the real world. Think of it like the internet before it became the internet. It wasn't just a place to look stuff up or stream videos, it was more like a library with a broken elevator, and the librarian was a confused cat who only spoke in emojis. So the question is, what's the one website or app you still think about? Like, was it GeoCities? Or maybe something like Napster? Or maybe even a simple thing like a chat room where you met your first friend online? It's not just about nostalgia, it's about how the internet used to be wild, chaotic, and full of weird things that somehow worked. And we're trying to figure out what stuck with people the most. So yeah, we're talking about the internet before it was cool, before it had filters. Just the raw, unfiltered, sometimes broken, sometimes brilliant version of the web. You think you know the internet? Not. You just know the internet's cousin who's got a weird obsession with 404 pages and dial-up sounds. The early web wasn't just a place, it was a vibe, like a weird but cozy party where everyone wore socks with sandals and talked about quantum physics. You still think about those sites because they were the first time you felt like the internet was alive, like it had feelings and maybe even a sense of humor. It's not just nostalgia, it's like remembering the first time you saw a rainbow, and now you're wondering why the sky isn't always that pretty. So yeah, maybe you don't use those sites anymore, but you still feel a weird, tiny pull toward them, like a ghost in the machine trying to say hello. Okay, so we're talking about the early web, like 1995 to 2010. Back then, the internet was like a brand new toy store, but everything was made of duct tape and hope. People used to surf the web like they were exploring a maze with no map. It was chaotic, but somehow magical. You'd click a link and wonder if you'd end up in a library or a spaceship. Some sites were just weird, like GeoCities, where people built their own websites like digital diaries. It was like a neighborhood of weirdos, each with their own color scheme and a weird slogan. Then came the rise of the internet as we know it, social media, forums, and apps that changed everything. But for those who grew up on dial-up, the internet was more like a Wild West town with no rules. So, the question is, what website or app do you still think about? Was it GeoCities, AIM, or maybe even a weird forum you stumbled upon? For me, it's that one time I found a lost puppy on a forum and it changed my life. The early web was messy, but it was also amazing. It's like the internet was just starting to find its voice, and we were all just trying to figure out how to speak it. So imagine the internet like a huge toy box, but instead of toys, it's all these weird websites. Some were just random stuff, like a guy's cat wearing a hat. You clicked on it, and boom, you were in a weird place. But there was one website that stuck. It was like your favorite snack, but the snack was a weird mix of things. You couldn't stop eating it, even though it was kind of gross. That website was the one you thought about. Not because it was good, but because it was weird, and you couldn't get it out of your head. Like a song you can't stop humming. You'd think about it even when you weren't using it. Like how you think about your favorite snack even when you're eating something else. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fancy, but it was the one website that made you feel like you were part of something. Like the internet was a group project, and you were the weird kid who got stuck with the cat in the hat. That's the one website you still think about. It's like your childhood memory, but with more weirdness and less explanation. So, you want to surf the web back when it was like a dusty library with only one computer and a dial-up sound that made your ears hurt. First, you gotta get a computer. Not a fancy one, just a box with a screen, a keyboard, and a mouse. And yeah, sometimes it had a floppy disk slot because that's how we backed up our stuff. Then you need an internet connection. Back then, it was like a phone line with a special box that connected to the phone. You dial a number and wait for the agonizing connecting tone. It was like waiting for a friend to answer the phone, but they were always busy. Next up, you need a browser. It wasn't Chrome or Firefox. It was something like Netscape, Navigator, or Internet Explorer. These were like the first apps you ever used, and they looked like they were made in the 80s by someone who thought the internet was a sci-fi thing. Oh, and don't forget the password. Back then, We use passwords like password or 123,456 because the internet wasn't that secure. It was like leaving your front door unlocked, but everyone just did because no one cared about hackers back then. Finally, you needed a connection, and if you were lucky, you'd get a modem that made a sound like a train. If you weren't, you'd just hear silence and wait forever. It was like trying to stream a movie on a dial-up connection, but you didn't know what a movie was yet. So, once the browser knows where to look, it has to actually get the data. Think of it like asking your neighbor for a favor. You knock on their door, they open up, and you just stand there. No, wait. You ask for the data, they give it to you, and you go home with a new file. But getting the data isn't just about knocking on doors. It's more like trying to download a song from a friend's MP3 player. You have to wait for the file to load, and sometimes it's like waiting for a slow elevator. But hey, it's 1996. So it's just a few seconds of patience. This translation process is like when your teacher says write this in your own words. You look at the sentence, think okay, I get it, then write it down and realize it's actually kind of confusing. But the browser doesn't get confused, it just does its job. And once it's translated, the browser has to put it all together. It's like building a Lego set with a bunch of random pieces. You have to figure out where the pieces go, even if they look nothing like the final picture. But the browser doesn't get frustrated, it just keeps building. Finally, once everything is in place, the browser shows you the website. It's like opening a gift that you didn't really expect. You unwrap the paper, see the present, and suddenly you're staring at a whole new world. So here's the real kicker, this whole thing is basically like a kid who accidentally built a treehouse out of Legos and then tried to make it look like a castle. It's not perfect, but it's kinda brilliant. The browser didn't just load the page, it had to figure out where to put everything. Like trying to fit all your toys into a cardboard box without squishing anything. But then, like a kid who finally gets the Legos to work, the browser just clicked asterisk and made it all fit. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. So the browser didn't just load the page, it interpreted it, like a kid trying to make sense of a grown-up's recipe without reading the instructions. And that's how the internet started to feel less like a weird, chaotic place and more like a place you could actually use asterisk. So here's the real secret. The thing that makes the web tick like a weird, half-baked toaster. It's all about protocols. Like, the web isn't just a place, it's a language. And back then, that language was mostly HTML and HTTP, which is like the basic English of the internet. HTML is like the skeleton of a web page. It gives it structure. HTTP is like the postal service telling the browser, hey, I want this page, send it over. It's not fancy, but it worked like a charm, and it still does. Then came JavaScript, which is like the nervous system. It makes things move, react, and basically turn your web page into a living, breathing thing. It's what turns static HTML into something you can actually interact with. And don't even get me started on CSS. That's the designer's touch, the way the web looks. It's like giving your skeleton a coat of paint and telling it to wiggle in a certain way. Without it, the web would be a bunch of ugly, lifeless bones. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now and in the description below. Alright, back to it. All of this together, HTML, HTTP, JavaScript, and CSS, is like the weird, half-cooked recipe that made the early web work. And it's still the base of the internet today, just with a little more spice and a whole lot more code. So imagine the web was like a really bad game of telephone, but with more cats and fewer rules. You'd call up your friend, and they'd tell you something, but it'd be like, oh yeah, there's this website where you can buy socks for $500 each. But then you'd say, wait, that's not how socks work, you're just trying to sell me a sock that looks like a banana. And they'd say, no, that's just how the web works. It's the 90s, we're all just trying to make money off of socks. So the web was like a weird mix of a playground and a stock market. You'd go to a site, and it'd be like, hey, I can sell you this weird thing for 1000% profit, but I don't know what it is. But then you'd go to another site, and it'd be like, oh, I can let you chat with a robot that thinks it's a psychic. And you'd say, that's not a robot, that's my grandma. So yeah, the web was like a dream where you could buy socks for $500, chat with robots, and no one knew what they were doing. But we all loved it anyway. You think you're cool for remembering GeoCities? Wait, did you know it had a little music player that would play your favorite song as you clicked around? It was like a browser with a jukebox and a dating profile. And here's the kicker, the music player wasn't just any player. It was like a little MP3 player that lived in your browser. You'd click play, and it'd start humming your favorite tune while you click through your pages. It was like your browser had a soundtrack, and you could customize it with your favorite songs. You'd upload a track, and it'd play every time you opened a new page. It was wild, and it worked. So yeah, GeoCities wasn't just a website. It was a digital playground, a place where you could build your own space, play music, and even date people. It was the internet before it got too serious. And now, when you look at the web, you're like, that was the real internet. It had soul, it had personality, and it had a little music player that played your favorite songs. It was magic. So, here's the first myth, that the early web was all about cat gif and weird ASCII art. Nope, not even close. It was more like a 1990s version of a library, but with a lot more broken links. People think the web was just random stuff, like a digital version of a messy kid's room. But in reality, it was more like a digital version of a public library with a lot of outdated books. You could find everything from government databases to personal homepages, but it was all a bit like trying to find a needle in a haystack that's made of string. The web wasn't chaotic, it was just complicated. Like trying to build a sandcastle with a chainsaw and a bucket. It worked, but not always in the way you wanted. So, the myth is busted. The early web wasn't just weird and broken, it was a complex, evolving system with a lot more structure than people give it credit for. So here's the thing. No one actually used Google back then. It was like the new kid in class, trying to be cool, but everyone just laughed and said you're not even on the same team. You remember when you typed in a search and it took forever to load? Like, 5 minutes to get one sentence? That was the early web, baby. Slow and full of broken links. But here's the real kicker. Even if you did get a result, it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack, and the needle was also missing. So yeah, Google wasn't the king of the early web. It was more like the confused intern who showed up late and got stuck in the elevator. And that's why when people say they miss Google, they're really just missing the chaotic, slow, and glorious era of the early web, like a time machine to the past but with more pop-ups. You think you're using the internet today, but honestly, you're just living in the legacy of those early web days. Every time you click a link, you're basically clicking on a 90s HTML page with a broken image. Like, you're using Facebook now, but it's just the modern version of GeoCities. You're just building your own little corner of the web, only with better filters and less dial-up noise. And let's not forget about the search engines. You're using Google now, but it's basically the evolution of Alta Vista. You're just typing in words and hoping the internet responds like it's 1998. Even your streaming services? They're just the next-gen version of Napster and Kazaa. You're just downloading content, but now it's wrapped in a fancy UI and not illegal. So yeah, the early web is still in your life, just hiding in plain sight. You're living in its shadow, and you never even realized it. So I'm sitting there, 1998, trying to load a web page, and it's like waiting for a dial-up modem to get married. The loading bar is like a toddler learning to walk slow, wobbly, and full of hope. Finally, it loads and it's just a text file with some HTML code. Like, welcome to my website. Please enjoy this boring paragraph about my cat. No images, no links, just a cat. But here's the kicker. The cat was actually a real cat, and the text was written by the cat's owner, who was also the cat's dad. It was like a family business, but with a cat. Fast forward 20 years, and I'm scrolling through Instagram, and I see a photo of that same cat now with a collar and a fancy website. The caption says, "My cat's website was the first one ever." So the lesson is, the early web wasn't just about code. It was about cats, hope, and the weird love we had for everything that loaded. So imagine if the internet had a speed limit and someone decided to break it. That's what happened with Napster. It wasn't just music, it was a whole vibe, like a party that never ended. People could share files like it was nothing. It was like the internet's version of passing notes in class, except the notes were songs, and everyone had the whole album. It was so fast, so easy, so illegal. The whole thing was a rebellion, like a kid who finally gets to use the parents' car without asking. The FBI showed up like, "Hey, we're here to talk about your file sharing habits." It was basically the internet's first traffic stop. Napster didn't last forever, but it made the internet faster, wilder, and more rebellious. Like the kid who taught the whole class how to ride a bike. So you're on this cool website, like a digital playground, and then boom. The server crashes, your browser freezes, you're stuck in a loop of loading circles. It's like your computer is trying to tell you, "I'm not feeling well, can we take a break?" You click refresh. It's like pressing a button on a broken toy. The page loads for 10 minutes. You start to question your life choices. You're like, was this really worth it? Eventually, it loads. But now the site is just a blank page. You're left with a feeling of existential dread. You're like, this was the future, and now I'm just staring at a white wall. You try to navigate. The links are gone. The buttons are broken. It's like you're in a museum with all the exhibits removed. You're just left with empty hallways and a sense of loss. You finally find a way out, but you're forever changed. You now live in fear of the internet. Every click is a potential disaster. You're like, I'll just watch cat videos. No risks, no rewards. So you're like, I remember when the internet was just a bunch of weird things. But here's the catch. The real problem wasn't the weirdness. It was the fact that nobody actually cared about the brochure. Do you think it was the ads? No, the ads were just part of the show. The real issue was that the brochure never promised anything real. It just promised a future that never came. I used to download MP3s. But the real problem was that the MP3s were just tiny files that took forever to load. The brochure promised speed, but it delivered slowness. And the best part, the brochure never had a return policy. So you're stuck with a bunch of weird stuff that just didn't work. Like a toy that only works when you imagine it. So yeah, the downside wasn't the weirdness. It was the fact that the brochure never had a real plan. Just a lot of promises and no delivery. Like a dinner party that never actually happened. In the end, the real problem wasn't the internet. It was the fact that nobody ever actually built anything. Just a bunch of people saying this is the future, and then nothing. So here's the thing. We didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, let's build the internet. We had to figure out how to make computers talk to each other. It's like trying to teach a dog to fetch, but with code and wires. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now and in the description below. Alright, back to it. They started with something called hypertext, which is basically like a fancy way of making links. Imagine if your favorite comic book had notes in the margin saying, read this next. But here's the kicker, the web didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was a bunch of smart people throwing ideas at a wall and seeing what stuck. Kind of like a brainstorming session, but with more coffee and less sleep. They had to make sure computers could understand each other, like teaching two kids from different countries to speak the same language. And guess what? They invented a whole new language called HTML. And then, like a kid who finally gets how to ride a bike, the whole thing clicked. Suddenly, the internet wasn't just a bunch of wires and code. It was a place for stories, games, and weird stuff like me talking about the early web. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching.
Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.